So the Solana guys have definitely done some interesting things. And what I'd argue that they've done better than anyone is just experiment with a bunch of different stuff. I mean, like, when they started building the Solana Saga, I don't think anyone expected that they would sell 10 million phones. It was just an experiment to see if, like, dApps and crypto native use cases could actually drive people to use a product that is innately Web3.
And that's what DePIN brings to the table, such that any kind of asset, whether it's energy grids, whether it's like wireless providers, whether it's GPUs, these are things that in the past were built and owned by 3 or 4 big authorities. And now it's getting completely decentralized where anyone can provide satellites, provide energy grids. It's pretty exciting seeing that come market.
We're super excited to have another episode of Proof of Coverage here. And today we're really fortunate to have Rushi, who's the founder of Movement Labs, here with us. Rushi, how's it going, man?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mahesh. Early morning in New York, but we're right before the DePIN Summit. Excited to see some of the projects coming out of DePIN Summit. And also excited to start yapping with Ash.
Yeah, we're super excited for the DePIN Summit. It's crazy. I think we sent out 100 invites and we have like 480 RSVPs right now. So,
Nice.
we just hired security. It feels like it might be standing room only, and hopefully going to be a really hypey event. So,
Yep.
If the clip gets out in time, Rushi's going to be speaking in a little fireside chat with Ash early in the day. You should definitely come check it out if you get the chance.
Yes, sir. I actually remember like a year and a half when DePIN wasn't like really a category. I pitched Mahesh for I think our priest or something, and you were explaining to me what DePIN was, and at the time I was like really confused, and I think we can get into like I was like, what is decentralized physical infrastructure? Does that mean like what is that? And at the time I only had like Hive Mapper to go off of, and now it seems like pretty much the number one use case of crypto is seeming to be DePIN in today's market. So I think you called it 2 years ago.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate it. I mean, look, it's been a big industry-wide effort. A lot of people, I think, have put a huge amount of effort into it. But the stat that I always go on is like, DePIN's only 7% of altcoin market cap right now. But if you look at the industries that it represents, telecom, energy, cloud services, such like these are multiple trillion-dollar industries, and all of these are going to come on chain. So, it might not be a 2-3 year thing, it might be a 20-year thing, but over the long term, we're really hyped on DePIN and hyped on obviously Move as a language kind of come into the space. You've kind of been building in the space for a couple of years now, and I've been pretty fortunate to know you through that process. You're also a very young guy with a lot of trust placed in you, man. So, I'd love to talk a little bit about maybe who your closest mentors have been and who you think in crypto is really driving big outcomes for young founders like you.
Well, I think taking a step back, crypto has always been like a very close circle, right? It's always been like very like old Ethereum research, like kind of hippie vibes, which was cool for the etc. Right? We need like this cult to bootstrap Ethereum, bootstrap most protocols today. But I think now we're entering an era where people are asking, what's the use case? The era of like Ethereum alignment, the era of spending billions of dollars just to like prove a point doesn't really make much sense. Now it's about how we're going to use it on chain, how we're going to penetrate new emerging markets, how we're going to bring new use cases on chain, how we're going to empower DePIN. And I think for that, you need to have younger minds. You need the ability to think outside the box and do unconventional things that maybe people won't like or maybe people will be upset with. But I think generally, like the younger crowd is coming to crypto. We're seeing like more Gen Z style marketing, like more avenues for TikTok and Instagram and these outlets. And for us, I think we started movement, I think November 2022, back week after FTX started, literally when everyone everyone had left crypto and called it a scam and pivoted AI. But we kind of doubled down. For context, my background is engineering. I spent my early crypto career in like Cosmos and Ethereum engineering. August 2022, I read this article while I was in college that said Facebook was building a new programming language. And for me, this was really exciting because I used like 5 years in Cosmos and 10 years in Ethereum. And here's the opportunity for literally every iOS, Android device that was running Facebook to have crypto running the backend, have a DM wallet built for every Facebook account, send transactions on the Facebook app. Literally the biggest use case and why we're all here. Unfortunately, that struck down because of regulation, but that got me going. I'm like, okay, this language is cool, it's secure, it's fast. It's also like hip. It's not quite like Ethereum aligned. It's not quite like what the pundits want. In fact, it's designed for actual users and actual use cases. So when we looked at it, we wanted to bring that language to mainstream. And to answer your question directly, I think obviously early investors, you've been pretty helpful in the early days, but I think Smokey, the Bear Chain team was kind of our first, one of my first mentors. When we started like our pre-seed, I think they were like wrapping up Series A. This is peak bear market. I was learning the community vibes and like they just did not care about like Ethereum line. They did not care about like how decentralized the validity proofs are or whatever. They were like, we're just gonna create a fun environment, have a few builders that are fun and genuine, and take it from there. And I think we've embodied some of those principles on Ethereum, and we're fortunate to have a great roster of investors today.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely an interesting moment for a while, obviously, when it felt like we were in a bit of a bear market. And,
Yes.
one of the things that made me obviously drawn towards what you guys were doing, aside from how interesting the underlying project was, which we'll get into in a sec, was just
Yep.
the energy you were bringing to everything, man. Like
Yep.
it felt like mid 2022, you needed people that wanted to be in the space for the next 20 to 30 years. And there was just so much nihilism in the ecosystem. So seeing you guys do what you guys were doing at the moment and going all in on it was a no-brainer. So we were super happy and proud to have backed you guys early.
Yeah.
But by the same token, hopefully trying to be helpful now and helping y'all scale as well. My next question is because we kind of did a similar thing of in the bear market, went after these narrow verticals or seemingly narrow verticals where, over an 8 to 10 year period, we both had maybe a little bit of underlying insight that they might play out to become really big outcomes.
Yeah.
Has the extreme focus on Move as a programming language and just this category for now made it harder or easier for you guys to scale?
Well, it was a contrarian bet and still is a contrarian bet today, right? It's not just like a copy paste EVM per se, where you can go around, get the same DEX, Uniswap, B3 fork, get a Lightning protocol. You're actually pushing forward a new narrative, a new paradigm, a new programming language, which is even in Web 2 is probably the most difficult thing you can do. Like CAC is so high. So yeah, I think it's an uphill battle at times when you have to say like, hey guys, move it. This is like this new programming language. You should learn it, and here's why. When all the financial incentive has always been on the EVM, and now recently Solana. I think after that like rise of Solana, this kind of rolls open. Because a year ago, everyone told me the EVM had won. The any non EVM was going to zero, and this one Solana was like $6 or like $8. And as soon as price action hit, and now Solana is potentially challenging Ethereum, now you have this crowd saying, okay, there's multiple programming languages. You have this interest for SVM, MoveVM, and forthcoming VMs that provide better speed, security, scalability. So I think today that argument is a lot easier to make because you have more Rust developers coming to market. It's easier to market towards them. But back then it was very difficult. And I think the way we combat it is we're fully even compatible with our interpreter, so people can write EVM code directly on movement. And then beyond that, what we're seeing is how do we get people interested in new language? And that takes years of dev, right? If you look at Solana, the first 2 years, you didn't have the best wallet experience. You didn't have the best user experience. So in a macro lens, you look at 4 or 5 year lens. And I think Move needs the time as well. So I think we're going to push it forward next 4 or 5 years. But today we're even compatible.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. In the early days of Solana, I mean, there was a lot of people crapping on them, but it was so clear that they were doing something different, and they're doing something different with a lot of conviction. And that's something that I think in the midst of the bear market, people have kind of pulled back on. But at the end of the day, it's really different things that give people the ability to just experiment coming to market is really what drives value in the medium term, I think.
Yep.
So to that point, man, I mean, y'all have raised a $38 million Series A. First of all, congratulations. That's incredible. But you did it with this tagline to make blockchain security sexy. So why security such a central focus for you guys versus other chains, or kind of why did you go after that branding?
Yeah, I mean, every year is $4.5 billion lost in smart contract hacks. Security is a lot like privacy, such that everyone knows it's kind of important, and everyone's like kind of sick of getting hacked. But there's not been like security coins that pumped. There's not been privacy coins that pumped. So people are like, yeah, it's cool, but it doesn't make me money, so I don't really care. Which is the unfortunate truth. Like obviously, like I'm not an idiot. I recognize that. So the question is, how do we get people caring about security, caring about more secure programming? And I think you do that by not making it part of the core narrative, by like having more value props. So where security is the fourth or fifth value prop, Whereas traditional like formal verification security is like you have auditing groups, you have like real time verification, and honestly, people don't really care. Like if I get hacked for $50 million, it's like okay, I saw 200 more million dollars in TVL, right? So people seem to like not care unless it happens to them. People don't care about privacy until someone like tracks all their on-chain transactions. So for us, we're just trying to raise awareness for hey, the EVM is broken in terms of security. Here's ways we can improve it while still living on Ethereum, while writing EVM code, and trying to make it more hip.
Yeah, 100%. No, I think you made a really good point there, which is it's something I think about with these Web2 platforms a lot, which is like you sell your privacy and you keep selling your privacy, and you're even aware that you're selling your privacy until
Yep.
something happens, right? Like there's an event, or, there's like it becomes very clear that the data is being used or misused in just really pernicious ways. What do you see as being maybe some of the catalysts, or said differently, like what issues do you kind of see with projects out there today that you felt that you really needed to solve?
So, one of the biggest things when I built a DEX builder for context before this. When I was building on Ethereum, the constant form verification is pretty difficult. So let's say, for example, I write three lines of code. But right now for the EVM, there's no way to ensure that I'm writing secure code. And for me, as like a 18-year-old, 19-year-old developer, I don't have the best skill set, obviously. I'm all right at writing Solidity. I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to auditing shop and be like, hey, can you audit my code for the next 4 or 5 months? When Zuckerberg was in his dorm, he was able to build a proof of concept Facebook in 3 weeks, launch it, and get feedback. That kind of principle doesn't exist in crypto, because if you do that, you're going to get hacked overnight, lose your entire consumer base, lose any trust you have with the consumers and your personal identity. So because crypto is so financial oriented, security of on-chain assets and reputation is incredibly important. So such that if you're a new founder or you're a new developer, you need the ability to go 0 to 1 in 3 to 4 weeks without extensive resources. And the EVM today, you can't do that. You need to spend $100,000 for auditing. You need to spend weeks, months on bulletproofing your code. And even then, you're not prone to nothing, right? You had, for example, Curve, Kyber, the DAO, pretty much every blue chip protocol. I think it's like 90% of all EVM protocols are at risk of being hacked. So the question is then, okay, well, how does the future look like? How do I get my mom using crypto, right? And every time I talk to my parents, it's like, okay, crypto is a scam, you're gonna get hacked, drug, whatever. And to an extent, they're true, right? So what we're working on is how do we lower the time it takes to deploy secure smart contracts, where if you're a new developer, you can go 0 to 1 in 2 weeks, writing fully secure code, getting it essentially real-time audited with a move prover, running formal verification in real time, which I can get into. And then beyond that, how do you create a secure execution environment for people to feel comfortable putting assets on?
Yeah, 100%, man. That makes a ton of sense. And the mom example is definitely one that lands. My mom asks me on like a weekly basis, what am I doing? And every time they see something in crypto, it could be anything in crypto. There's 2 MIT bros that were doing some of the hacking. Like everyone will come back and be like, oh, is this your project? Is this what you're working on? It's crazy how like everyone kind of perceives crypto as being one trade. So I'm obviously super excited that y'all are building in security or focused in security at a fundamental level. But, maybe just to take a step back, one of the worst case scenarios for like a DeFi project with a treasury, it's obvious, right? It's happened many times. You referenced it. It's a loss of funds. How do you think about DePIN and security's importance for DePIN and other maybe non-strictly financial dApps?
Yeah, I mean, like, it comes down to user assets and user identity, right? If you go to the GPUs example, right, you have like private keys that are on chain for GPUs that are worth tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars each. So like user identity is very, very important. For example, like IONET, they're doing GPUs on Solana and have work on Move now as well. And their biggest value prop is, look, we can't do it on EVM because A, it's too slow. So for us to process this amount of GPU transactions, we need a high throughput blockchain. With B, they're working on Aptos is enabling security first transactions. Because in this world where you're storing a lot of private keys on chain and you have a lot of user data on chain, it's very important that you have a very secure environment. So I think in the context of DePIN, like we have a team called Network that's building mobile devices for the movement ecosystem and beyond. And one of the key value props is you have a lot of financial data stored on phones, on mobile devices. It's literally why Facebook built Move, right? So when you're using mobile transactions or doing anything on Facebook, you want to make sure that your user identities, if you have a 14-year-old girl and she has pictures of herself like and her friends, you should probably not have that leaked on the internet, right? There's a lot of like protection laws as well that if we ever get crypto in the hands of masses and social, any sort of hacks, rugs, scams are simply not tolerable in Web2 worlds. Like the $50 million hacked every day, that's 4.2 billion lost every day, every year. It doesn't make sense in the Web2 rails when you can just use AWS, which doesn't really get hacked, right? So if I think in the context of DePIN, if we ever want to compete with AWS and actually decentralized systems, it's important that we have secure first systems.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, user data and just data sovereignty generally is only enabled by security and trust. And frankly, it's something that maybe is in the earlier stages of developing, and crypto hasn't done an amazing job
Yeah.
of addressing right now. And I want to circle back in a second, talk about some of the projects in DePIN that are building on you, but maybe just to take a step back, would love to start with, DePIN as a category has obviously exploded in the last few months. Would love your take on why that is. You've maybe referenced some of the more interesting projects you've seen out there, like IONET, but more generally, like, what do you think are the catalysts that are driving so much, flow and attention towards this category as a whole?
So, like, I can go to answers. The first answer I would say is like the advent of AI. Obviously, like when Nvidia stock goes up, okay, what's the ticker in crypto? Is the left curve answer. But I think beyond that, like we're looking for what crypto boils down to is decentralization of tokenized assets, right? For example, I was like with NSF dinner with AI bro, and he was like, okay, I want to rent a GPU for like testing my new app. And in Web2 Rails, you have to rent the GPU for like a year, which is pretty expensive for like a new college grad or someone who doesn't have resources. But now you can go to Kosh and rent a GPU for an hour, which is simply something you can't do in Web2 Rails right now, especially the cost levels that Kosh and IONET and these providers are providing. So I think this is a fundamental use case where when you're able to decentralize these physical systems, instead of bowing down to a centralized authority that can jack up prices on you and put you into snarky deals, you now have the community able to offer their cloud compute and the resources. We're seeing these like wireless providers, instead of having to bow down to like Verizon, AT&T, etc. You now have decentralized wireless providers, which is very exciting and hopefully gets to a broad landscape. So, I mean, the fundamental ethos of crypto is not letting centralization and big authorities control price points, manipulate markets, letting market and free markets kind of dictate price points, availability, etc. And that's what DePIN brings to the table, such that any kind of asset, whether it's energy grids, whether it's like wireless providers, whether it's GPUs, these are things that in the past were dealt and owned by 3 or 4 big authorities. And now it's getting completely decentralized where anyone can provide satellites, provide energy grids. It's pretty exciting seeing that kind of market.
100%. It's the collaborative nature of the infrastructure in a very inclusive way, as well as, how it enables experimentation, I think is what I'm so interested in about the space. And just, I've been so excited to see, obviously, the space explode.
I think it also gets philosophical, right? I think Eric Voorhees in one of his speeches was like, crypto is a thing that's only not government, but anti-centralization, right? We do crypto so we can do payments across the world without having to get a sign off for that, right? Same thing when it gets DePIN, right? We don't want to have to report everything we do on the internet to centralized authorities. We want the ability to transact and exist freely. So in this world, ideally, everything that we do in 30-year lands, for like the phone service I provide, that I use, the internet service on this laptop, kind of when I go get a bagel, their energy runs on a decentralized grid. That all stuff we would want run by decentralized authors, not 3 big players that are monopolizing it.
Yeah. No, I think that was that a speech at Permissionless? I remember that being just a fucking incredible speech. And he got the crowd so energized. And I think it's like, it's almost lost on us within society today that like freedom should be something that people prioritize from a fundamental level. And obviously it just feels like there's so much censorship and just so much control of what people want to are able to say and do out there today. And at the end of the day, that's just a travesty, because it's free expression that really drive the best outcomes in the world and drive the smartest people to create real change. So it's something that I think I've seen in DePIN where people are really pushing that freedom of expression to the max in a technical way. And some of the outcomes that we're seeing out of there have been absolutely amazing.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I would love to spend a second just talking about, what use cases that you theoretically see as being a very strong structural fit for Move. Obviously there's a couple of things that are already building on your network, but what would you like to see more of?
I think I'm always like pro experimentation. One thing that we're trying to like bring is new audiences and people working new stuff. So, for example, like, there's a team called Sentiment that's building physical bracelets. So it's like proof of memory. So when you buy your mom like a bracelet or you buy your son like a shirt, right now there's no way to tokenize the memory and like essentially tap your phone and relive that memory. So the team is working on small NFC chips where you can put that into a clothing device, put in jewelry. Anytime you tap your phone, you're able to bring back the memory of like the photos from that moment that the item was bought and given. So I think like the concept of tokenization of assets that weren't able to be tokenized in the past is it somewhat interesting. But I know like Daylight's working on like energy grids, which is pretty experimental and questionable. Like it's pretty difficult to do, right? But I'm very excited about it because we need experimentation. We need the ability to try different ideas and mess around. So obviously energy grids, that's very interesting. Wireless compute, GPUs actually scale. Like right now, I think price points are the main bottleneck where it's not necessarily as efficient as people would want. So hopefully get decentralized GPU price points down. But I think like looking at every industry that's run by centralized authorities, I think insurance is something that's yet to be wide open. Like how do we decentralize health insurance providers? That's a small thing that like is $1 trillion industry. Like United Health Group is the 6th biggest company in the United States. So how do we create insurance marketplaces? So like I look at anything that's centralized that people don't like and try to like figure out how we can use crypto to solve that. And any team that's doing that, I would love to support you.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, some of the use cases you're talking about are things that I've been thinking about for 3-4 years, and it feels like we're in the earlier stages of kind of seeing proliferate. I think people don't know that there's actually the original way that insurance companies were structured or scaled in the US were through these cooperative structures called mutuals, where like people were literally owning other people's risk and insuring them. And I've always been super excited for this to come to crypto, and it just hasn't happened yet. Would love your take on maybe why you think some of these use cases have kind of gotten to the point that like people can use them, are using them, maybe like the GPU type ideas, but stuff like health insurance is just moving a little bit slower. Do you think it goes to like the construction behind it, the trust behind it, or why do you think some projects are getting there faster than others?
Again, like comes back to value creation because venture capitalists as well as private market is like, okay, these ideas are cool, but there hasn't been a token that has done well, which is unfortunate truth. And in the past, it's always been, okay, infra has done well, that's where we're investing and that's our focus. But in the last, like, especially this cycle, we've seen this huge fatigue where people don't really want infra. People don't really want the 4th ZK AVM L4. That doesn't really make much sense. People actually prefer and lean towards these niche consumer plays that are really interesting. So I think in the past, private markets and this public sentiment was geared towards infrastructure because we were trying to get to the point where we could scale. And now we're at the point where infrastructure is done. Like I feel like we've solved most, like 95% of bottlenecks that we've seen in execution and cost, like creating custom block space. You can argue with L1, L2, app chain versus general purpose chain. Doesn't really matter. The point is block space is abundant. So now the question is, who's going to fill the blocks? And in the past, we thought we can just keep building more infrastructure and then they'll come. Turns out that it made sense. So now we're seeing this unique trend in the market where everyone's really focused on apps because focused on DAUs that are real. And that's this huge, wide open kind of avenue for DePIN projects to come in. For example, like Iona is one of the major projects to make it mainstream. And I think we're going to see all these DePIN projects come to market with real users, bring net new people to crypto. And that's going to be a big value add for their private markets.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you made a really good point there, which is that the things that are getting funded are the things that VCs think will make them money. And I feel like
Yep.
there's a small number of fundamental VCs that are really focused on, sectors and idea creation. And there's a lot that are just pattern matching. And, one of the interesting things to me about crypto is, what is pattern matched with making money isn't necessarily what's always pattern matched with creating long term value. And it feels like there's almost like a confusion there that goes back and forth in terms of like deciding what to fund on the basis of what's ripping at the moment in the market versus what it feels like society really needs. So how do you guys go about prioritizing, like when you think about what you really want to see building on Move? You obviously only have a certain amount of time, man, and you're
Mhm.
everywhere. You're building this company too. You have a great social presence, but what are you prioritizing for Move? What would you really love to see sort of building in the medium term? I think you mentioned that there was an interesting cell phone project that
Yep.
y'all were helping work
Yep.
on right now.
Yeah, so it's called Network that is based out of Japan, and they've already sold like 4 million phones. I think like the mobile scene is yet to be broken up. I think Solana Saga was a great first step, but the issue there was like it was built by labs, so like although it was a great job and like the original first subset worked out, it's a question like how do you scale with that beyond that, because obviously labs has to focus on the Solana L1 as well as the phone, which is quite difficult. So for us, we have a complete separate team called Network that's focused on building this mobile, essentially DePIN network, where people can go on the device, use Uniswap, use any Move-based apps on the Move network, and it functions like a typical Android phone. So users don't even know using crypto, but if you want to like use any DeFi apps, you can use it directly on Samsung or on the Android device. So I think that's a kind of network that's yet to be broken up. And the team's pretty well versed in like Samsung sales and Huawei and whatnot. But I think beyond that, personally looking at again like for the deep in space, more GPU like actual costs cutting down, because right now even if it's you're fractionalizing GPUs, it's still pretty expensive. So we're trying to work with a few teams like Hyperbolic to see can we create more like sustainable business models for that. Yeah, I think like coming back to like trying to look at different every single use case that exists in Web 2 and trying to disrupt it. I think Solana is probably the best place for deepen right now, so we're learning a lot from the Solana playbook. And yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. The Solana guys have definitely done some interesting things. And what I'd argue that they've done better than anyone is just experiment with a bunch of different
Yeah,
stuff. I mean, like, when they started building the Solana Saga, I don't think anyone expected that they would sell 10 million phones. It was just
yeah,
a experiment to see if like, dApps and crypto native use cases could actually drive people to use a product that is innately Web3. So, there's like all these big regulated monopolies, I think, that exist within Web2 today. Phones is one where there's, Apple and
yeah.
then the long tail of everyone else, it feels like. Social is another where there's kind of Facebook, Instagram, X, and everything else in the long tail. Do you think phones are the best attack vector as a whole to try to get normies into crypto? Or if not, what do you think that is?
Well, I think the distribution for phones is pretty difficult, right? It's like even if you
Yeah.
launch a new phone, it's difficult for like to penetrate most markets. I think Up Network is starting off with like Asian markets, and that's usually where we're seeing Android adoption first. I think things like I mean, going back to daylight, I'm not an investor, but I think it's interesting to see like energy grids where it's more like B2B to start off with, where you're able to go to certain companies and be like, look, you have this cost right now, can we cut it down? So for GPUs, what they're doing is like going to the big AI companies and saying your cost basis for acquiring NVIDIA chip GPUs is this much. We can provide fractionalized use cases, fractionalized time for this, cut your costs down. So I think the first kind of sector for disruption is B2B space, where you can go to these big corporations, see like they're spending a lot of money on insurance, security, like hardware, and trying to pitch them on this lower cost basis. The issue with decentralization is like it's never quite as cheap. Like you're probably paying more generally right now. For example, like XO is doing compute locally, whereas like I don't know if like centralized clusters are still technically more efficient, but decentralized clusters offer the ability to run models directly on your device, which in theory provides better latency and more like kind of throughput for your AI apps. But I think in the 2 3 year lens, once we can get these costs down to a point where it's lower than centralization, you make the pitch to every big business to say we are cheaper, we are like essentially allows your company to be more community driven. Are you interested in trying this out? And that's how we get first few use cases and first few case studies of big tech trying decentralized products. And then from there, we can trickle into consumers. I think it's kind of difficult right now to sell decentralized products to users because most people don't care about decentralization. They're just like, does it work? Does my phone work? Can I use Instagram? And I don't think like today that's disrupting is there.
Yeah, 100%. I've always believed that the decentralization side of this matters a lot, almost for like the political ideology of it all. To
Yeah.
say that this matters, the idea that, you know, long tails of contributors can create huge amounts of value and their opinions are extremely valid and should be included. The paradigm that I've always thought about this through is that like centralized systems are great for extreme efficient max output.
Yeah.
I think about this almost like a coach coaching a team. Like, you want a centralized coach when you like want your team to be the absolute best team in the world.
Yep.
But on the other side of it, if you're trying to train 1,000 ultra marathoners, like,
Yep.
you need a decentralized architecture because you're going to have to spread like the underlying attention across a very big group of people. So, you know, it's not 100% clear to me where we'll end up on the centralization decentralization spectrum, but I think you're spot on, which is that what users care about are products and products that work. And like, people aren't using something on the basis that it's decentralized. They're using it on the basis that it's like genuinely a better product.
Yeah.
So, man, with that, would love to pivot just a little bit because obviously you have a very interesting story yourself and you've done some pretty awesome things. And I want to make sure that a lot of our listeners out there, a lot of whom are sort of founders between 20 and 30 years old, get to learn a little bit from what you've built and what you've been doing. So one of the things I think you've done really well is build an amazing community, man, like an online presence, a fan base that seems to support everything you do. What advice do you have about how to build a community or how to get attention in a way that gets you builders and projects building extremely high convection things on you?
Well, I think the number one thing is if you're an app looking for an ecosystem, you're looking for how can you go 0-1? How can I get funding opportunities? How can I get data zero user base? How can I get metrics? And I think being app oriented and community first is like, obviously everyone says that, but no one actually does it. I've learned a lot from past playbooks, and I think generally like the L1, L2 systems, like, yeah, you get a big foundation, you get a bunch of B guys, and there's like a bunch of steps to access founders, and it's pretty like remote. Founders are pretty remote from their ecosystem. When in reality, it should be the other way around because the foundation isn't your customers, it's the apps, right? You're a B2B company. So for us and kind of the way I work is most of my time these days is like really focused on ecosystem, helping teams raise, get to market. I think it's like 9 teams that have raised rounds, like close rounds, and like announcing this week and next week. So we're super excited about that. And like, I also spend most of my time just talking to founders and understanding where they're coming from. Because I think the era of like the copy paste, Dex, Bridge, I'll launch a token and call it a day is kind of over. Ecosystems now are judged based on the quality of their projects, quality of their builders, the net new apps that are unlocked, the net new use cases. The fully on-chain order book kind of example doesn't really matter anymore. It's like, okay, you have your DEX, your lending protocol, but now what? What are the cool things that only possible movement, only possible in Solana? So my advice is don't follow any playbook because if you follow the playbook, it's already cooked. You have to start your own paradigm and build your own brand, like an ecosystem. For us, it was like, hey, we took a contrarian bet by building this language that everyone told us was dead. When we started fundraising, everyone's like, okay, move is dead. EVM is one. People were like, oh, Solana's going 0. It's a scam. And then Solana price action came up and everyone's like, wow, like now Rust is cool. So don't pivot AI just because you don't have PMF. Believe in something, believe in the product that you envisioned that you set out to do. And the best teams that exist are the ones that stick to their vision since inception. So for us, it was always bring moves to EVM. We started off doing that in the dorm rooms of Vanderbilt, and now we're 40 deep and still doing that. So believe in your vision, focus on your apps and ecosystem community, and yeah, stay honest.
No, I totally agree. And I'm a big believer, obviously, as well, that high conviction is really the only way. And if you're really not putting your ass on the line and your reputation on the line on a frequent basis, you probably haven't done enough work.
Yeah.
You probably haven't spent enough time actually understanding what you're working on. But the result of that, honestly, because we have these crazy cycles of up and down and prices even moving a little bit out of lock on both sides to what's going on an underlying level is that most crypto founders have to deal with a huge amount of adversity. They have to have a
Yeah.
really high tolerance for risk, right? How do you deal with that adversity? Like, how do you really, in moments where it feels like there's a lot of risk and you don't necessarily know how you're going to solve the problem, how do you really fix it? Or what do you do in those moments?
Well, I think first thing is having a team built around you that's designed to handle it. Like for example, like when we were starting off, it was just me and Cooper, and honestly, we were like pretty like didn't know what to do, didn't have the right network. Like we didn't have people support us really. Now the team is 40 deep, industry veterans, some of the best minds in space. So you let your team kind of lead. It's the point where we're pretty flat org. Our head of engineering, head of research, head of BD, etc., all feel essentially co-founder level where they can run their own show. I delegate and trust them to deliver and drive outcomes. So when you have a team that's pretty confident, has competence, and doing it for half a decade plus, you kind of as a founder like don't really need to be the one to make decisions. You rely on your team. But I think like beyond that, it's always relying on your supporters. Like now we have investors, we have like mentors, and yet people ask. I'm someone who like really believes in asking for help. I ask like Smokey like every day, probably for some stupid shit. But yeah, I have close people that I trust that have guided me through the process, and um, I'm not afraid to ask for help.
100%. That's great advice. And I've honestly said in the past that one of my biggest problems was that probably didn't ask for help soon enough and have taken a little bit too much ego in doing these kinds of things.
Yep.
And asking for help can be,
Yep.
a lifesaver and a game changer because yes, on one side you're putting you're yourself at the mercy of someone else, but you're also then maximizing their ability to feel involved in what you're doing. There's this interesting phenomenon called the Franklin effect, which is that if you ask someone for help, they're actually, or for advice, they're more likely to like you on the
Yep.
basis that you've made yourself vulnerable and actually seeked out their opinion. So I've always found that super interesting. In the context of that, is there any figure, whether historical, fictional, whatever, that you almost see as like a lighthouse that you can kind of look at every time you deal with this adversity and take lessons from their story in their life to help you sort of get around it?
Ooh, that's a good question. What do you think about that one? I think I, Muhammad Yunus is always like kind of a role model for me. I read
Interesting.
a few of his books back in the day. He went to Vanderbilt, which is the university I went to, and he was always his mythology was always interesting on like social entrepreneurship or just kind of our end game or my end game, where it's like when you're trying to change society and bring new products to space, the kind of social impact you have is the number one criteria. Like, yes, you can revenue ARR is very important, but in the grand scheme of things, there's millions of companies that exist. Most of them are doing like there's a good amount that do millions of ARR, and most will cease to exist in 5 or 10 years. The ones that remember, the ones that actually have this kind of transgenerational impact, are the ones that are changing lives day to day. So for Facebook, that was like literally bring social in their fingertips, right? For like Amazon, that was putting like shopping experiences on the internet and not needing to go to a store. So for crypto, I think it's like we're all here for decentralized and kind of disrupting the current centralized authorities for payments, DePIN, etc. So when I wake up every day, I'm like, okay, how can we build systems that my parents can use, my mom can use, trust that they can rely on infrastructure, and then have apps that don't talk about crypto, don't talk about blockchain, and instead provide higher throughput, better cost, and just use the benefits of decentralization so they don't even need to know it's crypto underneath. But yeah, Eunice talked a lot about social impact, using that as a number one guiding light for any kind of goals and milestones. And I think that's for us is like the success of movement is how many lives we can change, whether that's ecosystem projects that raise capital and now have their own ecosystems, or it's about like just generally how many people we can help mentor and learn about move.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense, man, and that's a great pick. I'm a big Muhammad Yunus fan, and I was sad to see him go to jail a few years ago, and
Yeah,
very happy to see him now emerge as the leader of Bangladesh. I was
yeah,
actually sitting around thinking like politics has gone so far to shit, and I saw that happen, and I was like, maybe there's still hope. Maybe
yeah,
there's a couple of countries out there that are starting to figure it out. But that's a great answer. And, his book and his work was pretty foundational to, even how I thought about the world in my early days. I was very interested in microfinance and such. And, great pick. So, with that, man, we're kind of getting to time. I want to use the last 5 minutes to do a very quick lightning round where, maybe I give you a word or a phrase or a name and you give me like the first thought that comes to your mind. So maybe let's go through 4 or 5 of these if it's cool with you.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So to start, Mark Zuckerberg.
Facebook.
Fair enough. BitTensor.
AI, crypto, boom.
Tim Waltz.
Visionary.
Daylight.
Mahesh's bags. Actually a net new cool use case that I'm excited to and not have to pay insane amount of electricity every day.
Jump.
I'm trying to be kosher about this one. Trading. Let's read that one.
Fire Dancer.
The future Solana.
Ethereum.
Distressed. Where I can go into that one. It's Solana's challenging it.
I like it. That's fair. And last one, Solana.
Totally the best founder in space.
Hell yeah. He's definitely a visionary and has done some amazing stuff. With that, man, well, look, this was amazing. It was great to have you on. Great to hear your views on both Move and DePIN and, the advice you had for young founders. I guess last thing, if people are trying to find you, people are trying to learn more, where would you direct them?
At Rushi Manche on Twitter and at Moving Labs XYZ on Twitter. Feel free to reach out. Happy support builders. And if you're interested in learning about Move, please reach out.
Awesome. Well, with that, this has been another awesome episode, and we're super grateful for Rushi for being on here. And I think with that, let's wrap it.
Thanks for listening to the Proof of Coverage podcast. We post new episodes Mondays and Wednesdays, interviewing the best DePIN and crypto founders out there. If you like this episode, follow us on Twitter at CoverageProved and all other platforms, including YouTube and Spotify at Proof of Coverage Podcast. Thank you.